Ready to go?
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and many thanks for braving the Brussels weather, which fully fits, of course, the strategic climate that we're dealing with today. Although that, of course, is accidental. It wasn't planned by the EPC. But I'm grateful to you all for braving the weather and coming to this session entitled Quick March, 10 Steps for a European Defence Surge. I must say that I particularly like the words quick and surge, which you don't always associate with defence strategy or defence planning. And we'll hear how those two words, quick and surge, can be turned into reality in the course of this discussion. First of all, let me present myself, Jamie Shea. I'm the senior advisor here at the EPC. I've been asked to moderate, which I do with a great pleasure. You all know that the reason for this session today is because the new Defence and Security Programme at EPC, which was established in the spring, so hasn't been around for very long, 9 months or so, but in that time has held nonetheless 4 expert workshops with people from industry, NATO, the EU, as you would expect, security defence specialists, to look not just at the why of a European defence surge. I think everybody in the room doesn't need me to give you a sort of short prep talk, and I can if you really want it, which is on why obviously we need now to invest more in European defence and security. You don't have to be somebody who feels that a war with Russia is possible, likely, within 3 to 5 or 8 years to believe that. I think even if we are not that alarmist, most of us would agree with what is often said these days in Europe, which is that we may not be at war, but we're certainly not at peace as we knew it either. But of course, once you've established the why, the key thing is the how. How are we going to turn those extra investments into extra capabilities for Europe? You obviously need money, but you can't sort of bombard your adversary with dollar bills or 10 or 20 euro notes. That money somehow has to be turned into the type of capabilities that Europe needs for both deterrence and defense, if that were ever called upon. Now, those of you like me who follow all of this, and our panelists know it very well, know that there are a very large number of things that you have to look at. It's a chantier which is really full of different things. How do you modernize forces? What kind of capabilities do you need? How do you get them? Do you buy in Europe? Do you buy outside Europe if it's quick, cheap, and convenient? How do you develop Europe's defense technological and industrial base? Deal with issues like regulatory impediments, particularly to arms exports and arms transfers or technology cooperation? What kind of standardization do you need? And then, of course, the big issue of how do we ramp up industrial production and get industry to invest if the profits for industry are long into the future, but the investments that industry have to make to get there take place in the here and now. How do we improve our resilience, diversify supply chains? And of course, so we now have in Brussels, as well as in NATO and the EU, a large number of different agencies and units and actors, some old, some like the EU Defence Commissioner, more recent, who are all there to push this effort forward. That's great. The more the merrier. Obviously, it shows that now the EU has defence probably with the same degree of priority as NATO. But, you know, do too many cooks spoil the broth? And how do we get the best out of all of these different people and different units working hopefully in the same direction? Fortunately, I, as the moderator, don't need to answer any of those questions. But we do have today, first of all, Paul Taylor. Paul is a senior fellow with the Europe in the World program here at the EPC. Paul is somebody who was with Reuters as the diplomatic correspondent for many years, and he is the rapporteur, if that's the right word, I think, Paul, at least for the this report. So I'm going to turn to Paul in the first instance to give you his resume, what you need to know. Paul has spoken about practical and actionable items, and that's what we want to hear from. I also am absolutely delighted, as somebody who toiled at NATO for several years in a previous life, to welcome one of my nearest. Literally, we had an office almost next to each other, and dearest colleagues of those years, Christian Liflander. Then Christian was the head of NATO cybersecurity programs, but now he's head of defense policy, so a broader remit. We've got a fellow think tanker who's well known in the Brussels biosphere, Raluca Csernatoni, who is a fellow over at Carnegie. And last but definitely not least, somebody who's also very well known on the Brussels circuit, Tania, Lațici, who used to be at the European Parliament dealing with security defense, but for the last few years, at least, it's been a long time now already, Tania, right? 3 years already has been with the External Action Service. So we've got the best rapporteur and 3 of the best discussants, which means that I can now stop talking. Of course, all give a sigh of relief as I say that, and hand over to Paul. He'll take about 10 minutes. Then the 3 discussants will have about 4 to 5 minutes to give their views. By that time, you should be well and truly warmed up, dear audience, and therefore I will invite comments and questions from the floor. Either directed to Paul, directed at anybody, but please give your name and affiliation and make it clear what your question is and who you would like to answer it. And then we'll give Paul a chance to sort of wrap up at the end. So, Paul, 1 hour, fast and furious, over to you.
Thanks very much, Jamie. What Jamie didn't tell you is that he and I think, first met at NATO in about 1983 when I pitched up as the Reuters NATO correspondent. He was in charge of the visitors program. So we've both come a long way since then. Thank you. And let me just say a few things about Quick March. First of all, the method, we tried to bring in all the stakeholders in 3 panels, one on industrial issues, one on financial issues, and one on human resources issues. And each time the idea was to identify where are the bottlenecks and look for practical, fast solutions to overcome them. Some are faster than others, but it's all about achieving results in the time frame that our military commanders and our intelligence services are saying we need to be ready for. So, some are saying 3 to 5 years. Others are saying a bit longer because of the casualties that Russia is suffering in Ukraine. But there's no doubt that all of them see the same picture, which is of a serious Russian threat to NATO, to Europe, within a short time frame. And we're obviously not ready for it, as the Ukraine war exposed. And I would just add that I think we are already in a way at war today, both in Ukraine, where our liberal democracy, our European liberal democracy is on the line, and we are supporting and must be able to support Ukraine. And we were exposed as being unable to supply Ukraine as we would have wanted to, because our defense industries were hollowed out after 30 years of peace dividend. Our stocks of weapons and munitions were very thin, and we just didn't have either the capabilities or the industrial capacity that we needed to immediately spring to Ukraine's assistance. And of course, we are also facing a covert war, of which we see evidence almost every day, with cables being cut, with cyber attacks, with assassination plots, with disinformation, with election manipulation, all sorts of ways in which our pain threshold is being tested. So the key messages for me in this report is, how do we fund it? How do we spend it? And how do we staff it? Those are the 3 things that we tried to look at. And if you've only got, if you've really got to get yourself ready within 5 years, then you can't wait for a multi-annual financial framework that's only going to kick in 2028. That even if member states of the EU were able to agree on a huge amount of money to be spent on defense, and Commissioner Kubilius has suggested it could be 100 billion, even if member states were to agree on that, which I think is not a given by any means, given the tenacity with which the other funds will fight to preserve their turf. It would only begin to be spent in 2028. And national budgets, well, national defense budgets are going up, but they're not going up at anything like the pace, with anything like the capability to buy what we need and to really get us ready in the time which our military commanders, intelligence services say we may have to deter a Russian attack. So we're left with the credit card. Buy now, pay later. And what we propose is to borrow the money. We're suggesting the figure of 500 billion, which is the figure that doesn't come from our own calculations, but comes from the Commission's calculations. And it's a figure that can be disputed. You could say it's 400 billion or 600 billion. You can think of it in terms of a percentage of annual GDP is currently being debated, 3%, 3.5%, 5%. Why not? Sky's the limit. But the point is getting that money now and being able to spend it and then repay it over time through future defense budgets. So it's allowing our defense ministries collectively, and I would stress the collectively, because I'm not the only person. Mark Rutte has said this repeatedly. If we just spend more, but go on spending it with the procurement systems and the national specificities that we do today, then we'll fritter the money away, and we'll need huge amounts of money. So we need to try and use this money to discipline ourselves, to procure together, to standardize our requirements, to standardize our testing and validation of weapons. You know that every single NATO country has its own system for testing, validating weapons, so that, you know, something that passes the test in Germany may fail it in Belgium, or the other way around. And there are examples of that. The Secretary General of NATO has given some splendid examples of, you know, where a company has designed an armored fighting vehicle, but each nation has different specifications for what it has to look like. So the door has to open on one side or on the other, and the number of people who have to be able to sit inside, and so on. And so they end up designing 27 or 32 different armored fighting vehicles. And this happened with the NH-90 helicopters, where there were more versions of the helicopters than there were countries buying it. So this is a classic example of how we are inefficient. And we think that this money that will be that I'm proposing should be raised by a special purpose vehicle, that's to say something that is outside of the EU institutions, put together by a coalition of willing countries, European Union members, but also European allies of NATO. And so that opens the door, if they wish to join, to the UK, to Turkey, to Norway, to the candidate countries from the Western Balkans, some of whom are NATO members but not EU members, some of whom are neither. And the idea is to try and borrow that money together and then spend it on joint European goods, as it were, joint European systems. So, for example, an air and missile defense, which has to be integrated. You can't have one country can't have its own air and missile defense in a continent as tightly meshed as Europe. So we need it to be integrated. There is no, so that for the purpose of clarity, we believe that this money should be used to meet European, to meet NATO defense plans, NATO force goals, NATO force requirements. I don't think that, although there's sometimes been fighting over a sort of straw man that the EU would set up separate different defense requirements or separate different technical standards for equipment or whatever, nobody's talking about that. Commissioner Kubilius has been absolutely clear. And this is using EU instruments, possibly EU regulation where useful, to help enforce NATO standards, which are voluntary and have, as we found in the war in Ukraine, it turned out that we don't all produce the same kind of standard 155 ammunition. So one country's 155 artillery rounds can't be used in another country's cannon, or if they are, they don't shoot accurately, or they destroy the cannon over a period of time. So there had to be different logistics trains so that French 155 could be used in French cannons and German ones in German cannons. And these are the sorts of inefficiencies that this war has exposed and that we can try to overcome. We think that that special purpose vehicle could be managed by an EU institution from the point of view of that has experience in issuing bonds. Obviously, the ideal would be that it would issue AAA rated bonds. The European Investment Bank has experience in this. The Eurozone's European Stability Mechanism also has such experience, but for a smaller number of countries, and it's a sort of rainy day fund for the Eurozone. So there are debates about who should do it. We've said, why not the EIB? And it should have a special arm for small and medium-sized enterprises, because what we've discovered is that in the people who are really having difficulty with access to finance, with basic banking services, insurance, sometimes even energy supplies, are SMEs, that they are unbanked or debanked sometimes when their banks discover that they're working on defense. In general, we think that there needs to be an overarching European Union European Council plus European Parliament joint declaration that defense is a European public good, and therefore that investing in defense is investing in something that is compatible with the ESG criteria, environmental, social, and governance criteria, that security is a precondition for sustainability. And that has to then cascade down the EU institutions, both in using EU cohesion and structural funds for defense or defense-related projects such as military mobility, building ports, harbors, bridges, roads that are capable of supporting a military mobilization. And it has to be cascaded down in terms of changing the European Investment Bank's guidelines, which preclude it currently from investing in weapons production, ammunition production, and so on, as you know. And this is something which, the same governments which declare European defense to be a European priority are the governments whose finance ministers sit on the board of the EIB. So they've got to put their money literally where their mouth is. And that in turn, we believe, and based on our roundtables, would send an important signal to private sector investors. Private sector investors are worried about investing in defense. It's reputationally dodgy. It can be bad for their credit rating. It can have their annual general meetings picketed by NGOs, have Greenpeace flying over the roofs of their factories, and therefore they're shying away from investing in defense. And we found this to be a broad European issue. We had in the room people managing trillions in pension funds, in responsible investment funds, who, for various reasons, had found defense a really sensitive thing to touch. And so when we asked them, well, would they buy bonds issued for defense by European governments, whether through the EU or as a coalition of governments, they said that could be an attractive instrument, providing there was long-term demand for the European defense industry, because everybody saw what happened with the people who set up factories to make face masks in Europe during the COVID pandemic. And then 2 years later, no COVID, no demand for face masks, and they all went under.
Paul, I need to ask you if you could then wrap up in just 30 seconds or so. And then we'll go to the panel.
There is within these proposals, there's a proposal for an EU-NATO New Deal, if you like, for collaboration between your two organizations to take it far further, not only on defense planning and standards, but also on the whole resilience and civil preparedness area. A joint effort there, with the Nordic model being the one that we advise. There are recommendations on how to get the personnel for both the armed forces and for the defense industries, including mandatory registration and assessment of all young people at the age of 18 to identify skills and potential candidates for military and civilian defense tasks. And then there are some recommendations about military mobility. Overall, we want to change the culture in Europe. We want to make defense, as it were, really a European priority and a European common good, and to find ways in which we can learn from our Nordic members of both the EU and NATO to make this a whole of society effort.
Paul, thanks very much. I know it's not easy to summarize 10 recommendations in 10 minutes, but you did it very well. And of course, the report has now been published, as you know. So if you haven't yet seen it online, or like me, you're still living in the 20th century paper age, there are paper copies to be picked up at the desk as you leave and to peruse at your leisure. So Paul, thanks very much for getting us started. So Christian, NATO was mentioned repeatedly by Paul. So give us a sense of how all of this looks from the perspective ouder EVR.
Indeed, and thanks, Jamie. So a couple of points just to kick us off. So first, I think we need to invest more in defense and weapon defense production. I think that's clear. But bear in mind that it's a dual challenge, right? I mean, on one hand, it's about sort of delivering so that Ukraine can defend itself. But on the other hand, and this is, of course, us from a defense policy point of view, we must deliver to keep our own deterrence and defense credible. So everything else depends on that. So perhaps not surprisingly, we certainly welcome the EU's new initiatives to increase European defense readiness, address military shortfalls, and enhancing its defense capacity. So I think that's why I welcome the report. I think it's a very good addition to the debate, a very good contribution, which I hope will be picked up when drafting the white paper. In fact, we are keen to see that the priorities of the new European Defense Industry Program, EDIP, and the national acquisitions really sort of align with NATO priorities. By the way, this is also why we have shared NATO standards quite recently with the EU. And I think the thinking from EVR is quite simple. By increasing investment, the EU can help NATO allies meet their capability targets. I mean, rising tide lifts all the boats, I guess, is the saying here. So that we have the forces, the assets to execute NATO's defense plans. To us, they are the bedrock of our collective defense. Some specific points. I would certainly agree with the proposal to encourage the EU in its next budget to allocate more funding for military mobility. This to ensure civilian transport networks are suitable for military movement. And to me, it's less about separate military mobility budgets than mainstreaming military requirements. It's almost sort of a mindset issue. And let me be clear, this is not just to help the Americans. To me, Europeans are going to need to get around the continent. And they're going to need the right infrastructure, road, rail, inland waterways, airports, etc. So this to help ensure we get the right forces to the right place at the right time. I would also like to echo the points, sort of focusing perhaps sort of on EU regulatory environment that we see is quite often designed exclusively for peacetime. Competition rules, workplace health and safety, environmental rules, customs procedures. What we have seen is that sometimes, in particular in crisis, these could all hamstring both a national and collective response. So perhaps a wider effort going forward, and certainly here, Paul, when he talks about sort of perhaps a broader look on how things are done. It sounds dreadfully boring, I know, but some sort of, I think, regulatory reform, even perhaps sort of creating exemptions, carve-outs that would reduce the risk, so that we, do not tie ourselves up in a red tape. As we're trying to get off to a good start here in Europe. And the very last sort of point here, decarbonization. Yeah, agenda is fine, but Europe is on a track to lose almost all of its own oil refineries. And this would make Europe entirely dependent on the United States, Middle East, and Asia for the hydrocarbons that we do need, and military is the primary user of those. So beware of unintended consequences going forward, would be my message. This is all about making sure that we can fight and protect Europe in crisis. I'm hopeful that this can be done. I think we have some good examples from the past. A tried and tested example, of course, is the multinational multi-role tanker transport aircraft fleet. EDA aggregated multinational demand, provided the legal framework, NATO procured and sustained the capabilities. So I think we can do it. Would be my message. This is good for the European economy, for European jobs and European security. But here comes the hard point. I think to be truly successful, we must strengthen the defense industry across the alliance. Yep. The way forward needs to involve the entire transatlantic family, including non-EU allies. I mean, my message to you is that we cannot lock out their expertise, capabilities, and innovation. And this contribution to us is essential for Europe's security and defense, and we need to have them on board. This will strengthen both European security and Euro-Atlantic security. I can tell you, if we go the other way, this will only benefit our adversaries. So that's the point here. And finally, very quickly on defense spending, yes, 2% target has been set in 2014, but we live in 2025. So we must step up. We need to spend more and spend better. And some specific points. When I look at the EU work on this issue, specifically looking at the Stability and Growth Pact, I suspect the Maastricht criteria, so to speak, I think there is a need to allow EU states to spend more nationally. I see that coming because many have already turned to us. Regarding an EU debt instrument, in whatever shape or form this will materialize, to allow countries to borrow to spend on defense, I guess from a NATO point of view, that's fine, provided that it doesn't come with strings attached. And I think it's the sort of devil in the detail that quite often matters here. Using cohesion funds to fund dual-use infrastructure, we're quite pragmatic and positive in this regard. The spending would be national, whether it's counted against the NATO defense investment pledge or not, as long as it's sort of spent by the defense ministries for defense purposes. And finally, on expanding the EU's budget on defense for industrial and capability projects. Here, I think the bigger it gets, and let's see how things develop, of course, the more questions will arise about the additionality. Is it just replacing national spend? Efficiency, does it actually work better than a national spend? And whether it's being used to drive another agenda, quite often sort of a protectionist agenda in this regard. I think from a NATO point of view, the message should be clear. Let's look at what the adversary is doing. Let's focus on the defense and deterrence. Back to you, Jamie.
Christian, thanks very much. That was 5 minutes with a lot of substance. Thank you. And I think here at the EPC, we're grateful because you obviously have read this and taken it very seriously because you've given us some good pointers. What you say is the positive reaction overall. EU efforts can really help NATO, but you put down a few markers. Balances have to be struck, right, between greening the economy, but making sure that you don't run out of oil or petrol in a wartime situation. Transatlantic defense market, while still obviously trying to build up Europe's own defense technology industrial base. Those are going to be difficult balances to achieve, and that's what obviously we have to look at, where that sort of cursor on the balance falls. But that was terrific, so thank you very much. Raluca, I know you're going to equally live up to this challenge. You've given us some good but also critical where necessary feedback, so please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the invitation and congratulations for the report. I enjoyed reading it. I will focus on a couple of points. First of all, I really enjoyed the comprehensive and very granular approach of the report, but I would like to highlight some of the key kind of takeaways that caught my attention. And I will move away from the defense spending conversation and kind of how much capabilities do we require, but rather focus on one of the highlights of the report, namely strategic culture. And I think that this is very important at the moment, especially when it comes to recognizing the strategic culture at the same time should be a goal to be achieved, whatever we understand by European strategic culture. But at the moment, it's also one of the biggest, let's say, challenges. I wouldn't say obstacles, but truly to create a European strategic culture. And I think that here the key message of the report is anything that requires a surge in defense and security requires not only financial resources, but also strategic strategic coordination across, first of all, indeed, EU member states, EU and NATO cooperation, but also governments, industry and society. And here kind of the added value, I think, of thinking more critically about strategic culture is to underscore in a way the importance of fostering this strategic culture, but also how to do it. Because we always say that, yes, the strategic culture and shared threat perception is missing. However, there is less, I think, thinking about how to approach it in a strategic way and how to communicate this sense of urgency to the broader publics and elevate this issue in public debates. And I really, again, like a quote from the report. The objective is to change, this is the quote, the objective is to change citizens' mentality from consumers of security to co-producers of security. And I think here the key, actually, the proof is in the pudding, because the key to change also the stigma and taboo over defense and looking at defense as a sensitive issue is to exactly engender more or trigger more reflections in the whole of society and whole of government about defense being a European public good. And comparing, kind of contrasting different approaches, you can engineer this top-down, indeed, in the cascading approach with kind of more an elite-driven approach. But I think that there is also counterbalance that is needed here. It's the grassroots approach, the citizen level approach, and especially in terms of creating what it has been indeed called a sense of reality that we are not at peace, neither at war, the quotes that come up, and kind of create what I would even say a sense of a war economy. I would in academic terms call it a war economy imaginary. But I think that the change in culture is hard, but somewhere it needs to be kind of discussed and publicly debated also for democratic legitimacy, especially on topics like defense. Then the other highlights for me in the report is exactly indeed the holistic approach. So the report, I would say, widely emphasizes this comprehensive strategy involving industry. Another element that was highlighted is infrastructure. I think that's also something that is key now with critical infrastructure and who controls it. And I would say both civil and military critical infrastructure, and then of course the human resources, the finances, and so on. So I think that indeed to ensure that defense investments are not viewed in isolation, they should be part of a broader societal and economic reflection and effort. Then the other highlight, of course, in the project is focusing on NATO-EU cooperation. And I think that one element here that can be amplified is exactly the notion of hybrid and kind of aligning efforts between hybrid threats, hybrid warfare, and bringing that preparedness back on. And here is, again, a window of opportunity for enhanced cooperation, because hybrid for me involves lots of things from FIMI to cyber and so on. And I think there are opportunities there to move forward. And finally, of course, the innovative financial mechanisms and thinking a bit out of the box of how to ensure actually that those 500 billion euros are put on the table. I'm someone that follows more the debates on emerging and disruptive technologies, specifically the buzzwords, artificial intelligence, quantum, and what I would call preparing for the wars of the future rather than preparing for the wars of the past. And just to give you an example, that just this week we heard from Washington, D.C., a very important project being announced, Stargate project. It's an open AI project together with other companies like Oracle, SoftBank, and so on. And they propose just to put forward an AI infrastructure, a funding of $500 billion for 4 years. This is just AI infrastructure. It's meant to reindustrialize the United States, and also it's a strategic capability for national security. So that's how the framing goes. Of course, the money, where it comes from, it's still TBC, but it's very ambitious. I would say that this is just the chunk of money that goes for one dimension that is critical for the reindustrialization. What does that mean for preparing for the challenges of the 21st century? But that's kind of the point I also want to make here with the wars of the past and wars of the future. It's very important what type of capabilities all of these financial mechanisms prioritize, but also thinking more broadly about the European technological and industrial base in commercial civilian terms and how that can support the European defense technological and industrial base. So these were kind of my points that I wanted to raise. Maybe just last point, it's my kind of let's say 2 cents when it comes to strengthening the digital infrastructure security. And this is also picking up on the previous point on energy security. This is an area as well that will become more and more strategically important. And in terms of the priority list and laundry lists of what should be emphasized and what gaps should be filled, thinking not only about now, but also in the long term might be a good way to go about it. So once again, thank you for allowing me to engage with the report. And I would say that ultimately all of these very important recommendations without the political will and the strategic culture dimension will be harder to implement. So I hope I was 5 minutes, and thank you.
Look, absolutely, and again, admirable. In 5 minutes, lots of really extremely interesting points. I mean, the issue about how you develop a strategic culture. Here at the EPC, we also, with Paul, he knows it, agonized for many a long day on the balance between, going back to producing Leopard 2 tanks, the old style sort of high velocity conventional warfare versus the new technologies. Also, investing like Ukraine in very cheap, easily produced cottage industry drones. And more expensive, traditional multi-billion platforms there. That's also been something I think is important. And also what you mentioned, to the extent you can hook defense needs onto civilian technology programs like military mobility, improve roads, improve railways, but also that's a military use. So there's the points you make that we've grappled with already, but you're right to make them because we haven't necessarily come up with the final answers yet. Raluca, thank you very much indeed. So as always, Tania, thanks for your patience. But now the reward is that you get to have the last word, at least of this round.
No pressure. Thank you very much. I'd like to first maybe zoom out before zooming back in again. I just came back yesterday from Singapore, where I was at the IISS Shangri-La Forum at the Director General level. And I'm mentioning it because I think it's really important to take this more global perspective and to see how we are all in a bubble. How I think, Paul, you said that we are at war. That's not how this is seen at all on the global stage, I have to say. I mean, this Shangri-La Forum is basically a platform for diplomatic speed dating. Everyone has like half-an-hour bilaterals with all these different countries, mostly Asian countries, but also many what we call like-minded countries, and DiploSpeak are there, so many friends. But it's also a platform for countries to kind of posture and position themselves. So China does that very well. Normally, the US does that very well as well, but it happened to be during the Trump inauguration. So we had a bit of a less of a US voice during this edition. But my point with this is that even though we have North Korean soldiers dying in Europe and Iranian drones killing Ukrainians and their energy infrastructure, and almost 80% of dual-use goods going either from or through China to the battlefield, this is still not seen or not empathized in the same way as it is in Europe. So for us, it is clearly an existential threat. It is very blatantly obvious for us that the European security and Indo-Pacific security are interconnected. You say this, and yet the answer is mostly muted. So with this, my point is that I think Ukraine will be our responsibility. Sorting out Ukraine in the right way, it really is our responsibility. So this is very much linked, as I think you said as well, with defense efforts. So let me now say a quick word on your paper, which I fully agree is really good. To the point, it's a very valuable contribution to everything we're trying to do now on the white paper on the future of European defense, support Ukraine preparedness strategy. I think overall, you capture that there's this gloominess and pessimism in Europe. It's really, really felt. But then I think you have managed to somehow find the light and to find some solutions to that. And I think you rightly use the word stubborn to refer to the problems that we face in defense, whether they're political, financial, or practical. And I think this is where the vision comes in. So as I mentioned, we're working around the clock on the white paper and preparedness strategy. Then this needs to be followed up with political courage. And I think that's really the key here. And then we need them quickly. So the quick march comes here. What I also appreciated it as a contribution is that it was a very good balance kind of showcasing the responsibility of all stakeholders, whether it's kind of different actors in the EU, whether it's NATO, whether it's member states, the EIB. So really trying to have this all hands on deck approach to the problems that we have. So I think there's reason for optimism for, at least when it comes to the prospects of our work with NATO, and I think the prospects on all over defense. So let me now kind of say a quick word on the white paper, which Diego de Ojeda was supposed to be here to help me in this burden, but I shall bear it by myself, it seems.
You can do it perfectly well.
Don't expect me to be too controversial here. It still hasn't leaked, which we're very happy about, so I'll keep it nice and safe. Basically, the white paper will touch upon almost every aspect of your recommendations. Obviously, we'll look at Ukraine. It is an inherent part of what we're trying to do on defense. The question is, or the questions are, what are the capabilities that we need? What do we need to do to fix our industry in Europe? And then the big question is, how are we going to pay for it? Another question that will be front and center there will also be, how can we do that together with partners? Now, EU defense by definition has an external dimension, this partnership dimension. We like to say it's in our DNA. Obviously, the US will remain our security provider. Obviously, we'll continue to buy American. This is just going to continue. NATO is a key partner when it comes to, I don't want to repeat what you said. I agree fully with Christian. And then we also have seen a much more emphasis on defense industrial partnerships that we've seen now with Republic of Korea, which has become much more present in Europe and politically. So where I work at the ES, we're trying to deliver on this at the political level by having this focus on security and defense partnerships. We've signed one with Norway, with Japan, with Korea. I was very happy to hear the Japanese and Korean delegates at the Shangri-La speaking about them. It was a bit music to my ears in the gloominess that we had in the room. And I think next week we'll also have lots of high-level EU-NATO stuff with the HRVP and with the college. So the new NATO section is very active, which we're really happy about. And then this will be followed by a leaders retreat, by the Munich Security Conference, where I expect, again, you'll get more and more hints about what we're doing. And then the big day will come and we'll publish the white paper. So just to kind of give a bit of a timeline of what we're working on. And then I also wanted to give a shout to the work on the preparedness strategy, which I think relates a lot to many of the recommendations you have on resilience and whole of society approach, and how we have to work with together with NATO in a joined up approach. So just some food for thought.
So thanks very much. It's still great that a conference on security defense could take place in a hotel called Shangri-La. I wonder how long before you either have to change the topic or they have to change the name. You mentioned these partnerships, which is, of course, is vital. You didn't mention the UK. Obviously, there may not be a text on the table, but I think, given everything that's going on at the moment, and the UK and the EU now meeting more often, plenty of people are going to be asking, particularly given the size of the UK's defence industries, technology base, what the prospects are there. Maybe that will come up in questions, but I'll put that as a question to you as we go into the questions. But thank you, everybody. So great input. So no excuse for not asking questions. You've been given plenty of substance to reflect upon. Let me put my long-range specs on. So I see Eleanor already. By the way, I see Emmanuel too. Thank you, sir. We'll take you three if we can, then we'll go to the panel. I should add that we do have people following us online, of course. So dear people online, please put your question in the chat where Mihai, Ure will be monitoring all of this and will feed your questions into me so that you will not be forgotten or left out. But first, Eleanor, please.
Thank you very much. Elena Lazaro from the European Parliament's Research Service, shamelessly asking the first question after I walked in late, but I hope you'll forgive me.
Only for you.
Thank you. Well, and also to your comment about the hotel, what about the fact that the rest of the world decides about security defense in a hotel called Bayerischer Hof? I'm not sure that that's as bad as Shangri-La. But anyway, no. Thank you very much to everyone. And obviously my questions relate to the last three speakers, who I managed to see, to listen to. So it's kind of links things, because Raluca mentioned strategic culture and total defense, essentially bringing together civil and military defense, and Tania alluded to the fact that it's very difficult to get on board with everyone around the world on what really the security challenges are of today. But thinking about these two things and coming off a meeting with representatives of the Argentinian Department of Defense yesterday, my sense is that civil defense, so defense against hybrid threats, against foreign interference, against attacks on critical infrastructure, that's sort of a globally shared strategic threat. And so I wondered, and shameless promotion again, we've just published a paper on the 6 security and defense partnerships that Tania mentioned today. But I wondered, is there a strategic interest of the EU in directing our partnerships where appropriate to that, to total defense, to civil defense, to, not necessarily always looking to the sort of conventional defense partnerships, and I know this is what is being done now, but how much space, Tania, do you see for that?
That is a very good question to Tania in the first instance, but Tania, hold your fire, because I said we'll take Emmanuel, you're next, please, sir, and then, yep, that's it. Hold your fire, we'll take the other 2 first.
And thanks so much. Emmanuel Jacob, Euromil, European Organization, Military Associations and Trade Unions. Thank you very much for this document, Paul and your team. It's for the first time that we bring security and defense discussion, not only on defense industry, but also on all the other capabilities that we need, military personnel. It's a main part of your document. The question, of course, will be, how do we manage to bring not only NATO and European Union together, to discuss the challenges that we have, and not only on the European level. The US has exactly the same problem, and I think that the problem in the US will even get bigger in the years to come on having sufficient military personnel. But how do we bring them together? But not only them, how do we bring society together? All social partners, employer organizations, employee organizations, defense industry, to make sure that in the future we not only have enough money to invest in security and defense, enough industry to deal with that, but also finally men and women to fly.
Question perfectly well. Sorry to cut you short. The question is posed. It's just that I'm looking at the clock. We don't have a great deal of time, and lots of hands are going up. So short questions, please, everybody. Sir.
Yes, I'll make it short, but I want to introduce myself. I'm Rolf Kubi, heading the office of Euromines, raw materials, mining industry. So it's quite obvious. My pledge is no raw materials, no defense, make it a story short, no rare earths for Europe, no defense for Europe. But I wanted to highlight that interaction of the dependencies and the value chains. And so I would like to hear something about that. How far is that going to be picked up in the white paper? And also, how far are you working together as industry? And I heard a lot about changing the culture, and I fully agree with that. We need to change our culture, and we need to see that there is more needs in the value chain along to sustain our defense and to make it possible.
Okay, thank you. Those of you with your hands up, that I'll get you very soon, so don't give up on us. We're going to have short, quick fire answers, dear panel, so that we can have a few more questions. So Tania, you were named deliberately, so I'll start off with you. And then to the rest of the panel, don't need to respond on everything, just respond on any of the points you want to pick up so that we've got time for more questions. So Tania, please.
Let me just say a quick word on the UK. It's really your fault that I haven't mentioned it. You pressured me so much to stick to 5 minutes. If I would have had 6, I would have mentioned the UK. No, I'm joking. It wasn't on purpose. I promise you. There's lots of emphasis on our partnership with the UK now, and lots of impetus, I think, and political will to do something. We also met the UK at the Shangri-La, since we talked about it. It was really, you can see that we're very like-minded in a sea of not so like-minded, perhaps. You'll have the UK PM at the leaders retreat. You had Lamy at the FAC, so I can go on and on. I think there's a lot of I know there's a lot of very active diplomacy going on to make sure that we deliver on that. On Elena's question, thank you. The way the EU now thinks about these security and defense partnerships is not a one-size-fits-all, but very much tailored. So that's really the key word that we're looking at. It all started with the compass, and then so with each partner, we're trying to see, what do you want to work on? What do we want to work on, to try to really become I'm tempted to say transactional because that's a bit the word of the day these days, but I would say focus more on mutual benefit. So it goes across the board of the peace, security, and defense spectrum, from cyber to foreign influence and information manipulation to outer space, civ mil, all this stuff, including defense industry, by the way. And then a very quick word on value chains, supply chains. Yes, I mean, diversification and safe supply chains is really also another word of the day. I would say I don't work on that. That's the Commission's business. It's too bad they're not here to tell you that, but I can certainly say that will be well reflected in the way we'll put together this vision for the future of defense. It has to be.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Christian, you're next. Could you also pick up Emmanuel's points on personnel manpower or woman power or conscription or whatever? Because I imagine at NATO, you've got that on your mind as well, not just the weapons, but the soldiers who have to use them.
Correct. Actually, that's the reason why we have started our conversation with the personnel directors in the nations. And what very quickly became evident is that there's not a silver bullet. There's no one size that fits all. So I think what we're looking at is a sort of different best practices. Yes, the fact that some have conscription doesn't mean that everybody needs to be conscriptors. Some are sort of experimenting with reserves. You have interesting examples here in different kinds of nations where you might sort of become a reservist. It doesn't mean that you cannot provide service, et cetera, et cetera. So I think what we will do, and I can tell you, I think Secretary General has mentioned the, 2 words, capability targets. It's very sort of, nobody knows what it is, but they're demanding, et cetera. I think what we're looking at, the demand signal going forward is going to be quite substantial. And we're not going to be back at the levels of the Cold War, but it's going to be a quite a significant ramp up. And one of the elements indeed is how do we have people for all of that? And here, let me pause a little bit on innovation just for a minute or so. And that actually sort of ties this to the defense spending. So the capabilities that you have today are not necessarily the capabilities that you will have tomorrow. And that goes also with who's operating them, right? The fact that we might need a rotary wing, a helicopter, today doesn't mean that we cannot provide the same effect on a battlefield by using drones or UAVs. So I think there's going to be, this is going to take a bit of time in this regard, and I think the human element will be connected to it. But at the end of the day, the way we look at it is that rising tide lifts all the boats. If there's no money, all of this is kind of interesting, but it doesn't move the needle.
So it's the mission that determines the equipment rather than the equipment that determines the mission, as Don Rumsfeld, were he still alive, might have paraphrased it. Raluca, please. Paul Taylor, I'm going to ask you to hold fire on this because you get the chance to respond to everything in your wrap up at the end. Raluca,
okay,
please.
Thank you so much. Super short. Maybe to pick up on the military personnel, and I definitely agree, the human machine dimension of all of these sophisticated technologies will be necessary, and especially to work with interfaces that are super complex. And I think that here the challenge is indeed to recruit the best talent, because the private sector offers the best exciting labs to working, the most exciting salaries. So especially when it comes to STEM, there is a risk to always kind of fetishize AI as the next best thing, including to outsource some of the skills of the military personnel to the AI models. And that's also something to consider in terms of the labor force and the impact in that. But I think that exactly by building this buy-in of a shared responsibility and also certain values by serving in the military might be a best way to go about it in creating that shared societal dimension when it comes to being an IT developer and joining maybe the military forces. So there is kind of a very fine line here indeed in terms of competition with other industry and stakeholder players. And maybe just a point on the critical raw materials. There already have been a lot of reports to identify which critical raw materials are important for defense. I think 40 were identified. Also, where are kind of the pressure points in each of the critical material supply chain, and especially geopolitical factors. And I think that having a very clear understanding of the kind of the critical raw material value chain would be will offer a strategic advantage to European defense companies to understand where are the pressure points and how they can be weaponized. So I think that there is, again, a push towards thinking a bit out of the box and bringing in all of these elements that can become disruptors at the end of the day in capability production, especially when it comes to the digital side of the story of the digitalization of the armed forces. And last point on the total defense, Elena, I like this kind of approach, and I would say that this would be a unique selling proposition for Europe as a collective security provider or global provider, and especially building on this model of civil defense and total defense, that here the emphasis is on preparedness and readiness. And this would be attractive to other places around the world as well. Thank you.
Raluca, thanks, and thanks again to Paul for being patient, but he will get the final word. There are quite a few hands up. So first of all, I think online, because I promised not to forget our online audience today. So Jurek, if you could just give those online questions quickly, and the panel will note.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. I will be very brief because you asked for brevity. So a question I would say it goes to Paul. It's about European strategic autonomy. Maybe you should explain why it's not in our paper, why we don't use this term, and how European strategic autonomy can be reconciled with NATO.
Okay, thanks. Paul will answer that in his wrap up at the end. The gentleman at the back there, please, who got a very firm hand in the air.
Thank you. My name is Armila Dani from Euro-Atlantic Consulting, and we are a firm that works for Hungarian and Central Eastern European companies in EU fundings and defense funding as well for the industry. And there is one point in the third recommendation, which is about the reallocation of cohesion funds and next generation fund. Can you elaborate that? Is it a relabeling of different funds, or is it does it stay in the same region where the cohesion funds is intended to stay? Thank you.
So labeling versus new funds, that's an interesting question. A gentleman right at the back, please.
Thank you for the report. My name is Romain Lequignou. I'm from France. Don't worry, I like the report. I'm leading.
We are reassured. Thank you.
I'm from a think tank called Euro Creative, which is a French think tank working on Central Eastern Europe. Very briefly, the report and the quick surge focus on European political decisions from decision makers, but I think that we forgot also the political dimension of it. European politics in the discussion, the situation is simple. Most of European main powers are in political crisis, political instability, also budgetary and financial crisis for some of them. The problem is simple for Western European politicians. They cannot really raise security because they have financial problems. They don't have margins, and they don't want to burn money that they might use against populist movements. And second, they don't win elections with security matters. So how we change that?
Okay, that's a very relevant question. Forgive me for making it short. So we've got just a few final ones we'll pick up. We're going to go slightly over time. So quick questions, please, and then we'll wrap up. So.
Thank you very much. My name is George.
My name is
George Cardoso. I work for S&D in the European Parliament in the Committee on Security and Defense as political advisor. Two quick questions for Paul. One is I've always seen the SPV as a sort of a way to go around the limitations of the EIB. So you get the EIB to manage the SPV, but you mentioned both things, the SPV and changing the criteria in the EIB. So are you calling for both things at the same time, or do you think one is necessary for the other?
Paul will elucidate that very well indeed. You said two questions, yes, I do.
In the Draghi report, it's very interesting. It says that sometimes member states don't buy from firms in other member states because they're not aware of the existence of certain equipment. And it points sort of in the direction of a central catalog and a central entity that can help member states find things in the other member states.
Yeah, I thought the European Defence Agency was doing all of that, but maybe Paul will lighten us on that point as well.
Really highlights this problem, so did you look into that?
No, it's a good question. It's a very good question. The questions are excellent. Thank you very much. The answers are very good too. Okay, we're going to have three, and that's it. I closed the list off because we are stretching the time. So three quick questions, please. One, two, and then last one to you, sir.
Thank you. I am Nora Bahur from Turkish Industry and Business Association. My question is, you stress the importance of non-EU partners in helping defense. However, how can the EU include partners such as Turkey, who have an interest in keeping balanced relationships with Russia and are not really motivated to contribute to the war against it?
Okay, thank you for the very succinct question. Turkey, very important that we also mention that country as a partner. Somebody was there in the middle. Yes, sir, it's you.
Hi, Justin Moan, NATO International Staff Defense Investment. And so I guess my question to the whole panel is, how do we operationalize the report's note of a good idea to link NATO defense planning, force goals, and force requirements to EU regulatory mechanisms? I think.
Okay, I think Christian is the ideal person for that. And so it's the last one. Thank you very much. I'm sorry if anybody else wanted to ask a question, but we're out of time. Sir, it's this very patient gentleman here.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Yeah, Giuseppe Spatafora, European Union Institute for Security Studies. Very, very quick. I wanted to choose between the many points. I guess the one is on the preparedness of the military forces and civil defense. This is obviously going to be hard sell in several countries, especially the ones that are far away from the northeast frontier. So the question is, what kind of topic do you want to use for that? Because I think the key point there is to develop skills, and skills that are transferable to different places. So for instance, in countries such as Greece, Spain, Italy, it's a good point to try to prepare civil preparedness against extreme weather events. That creates, and how to survive that situation. That creates some set of skills that are then useful in civil defense situations in case of attack. So that's, I wanted to choose from more, but I'll limit my.
No, thank you. But it's a fascinating question, of course. Yes, whether you use the military to do these things or have some sort of civil protection force. We've had a few conversations on that. So thank you. So that's it. So there's a smorgasbord of different questions. What we'll do then is go in reverse order. Raluca first will pick up what she wants to pick up. Then we'll have Tania, Christian, and then Paul, as I said, you get the grand wrap up at the end, but there are also some specific questions to you as well. So Raluca, please.
Okay, very short, maybe one point on the preparedness side. I really enjoy how, for instance, again, the Baltics and the Nordics approach it from kindergarten, actually. And I think that's also important to start early, at least to make children aware even about FIMI issues, how this information happens in cyberspace and what potential malicious actors can appear, and kind of understanding kind of the skill sets more in terms of the out of the box, not only to how to do a fire, but actually to understand when disinformation happens. So preparing, starting early, that would be my solution. And maybe that's a hard sell for sure, because you need to reform the educational system for that.
Quick reactions. First, perhaps on the self-acclaimed French person. I just wanted to pick up on something you said. I think you said that they don't win elections on security, right, on a security agenda. And this is something that triggers me. Be warned. I think two politicians, I would say, don't underestimate your electorate or insult them, which often happens. I'm Romanian. Look a bit what's happening and what has happened in our election. I think that's really the message. Polls are only so revealing. I think another thing you can look at is the Eurobarometer, for example, which shows that around 80% of European citizens want more common action. So I think we just need a bit of political courage to make that happen. On Turkey, a very quick comment just to say Turkey is a very long-standing partner of the EU. Yes, I will be very diplo now. It is true, especially in the Western Balkans, we work a lot on Althea together, but also very much in NATO. And I think there is a very positive momentum now on the whole EU-NATO agenda, which comes with a very positive EU-Turkey agenda on defense, at least, if you ask me. And then finally on NATO, not to foresee what Christian is going to say, I think it all starts with information sharing. And I think we have already seen really a big step change on that. You know, if we at the EU want to have very targeted and very effective action, the more information we have, the better. I think we all agree here that we need to have a joint up approach. It is in our ultimate common interest. If we face an existential challenge, then our response has to be accordingly. Thanks.
And thank you very much. So Christian.
Really, 2 points indeed. Just to piggyback on what Tania just said, we have a very active staff dialogue. I mean, the structured dialogue in place, but there's only, of course, so much that happens at the staff level. I think we have the momentum. We have new leadership in both houses. I'm positive. I'm positive, and that's also the reason, by the way, what I why I decided to mention the release of NATO standards to the EU. So I'm hopeful that this will be followed by other similar positive steps. But when it comes to the question of populism, I can tell you when we look at it, the cost of failure when it comes to deterrence will be much higher. So it might seem like a pretty big price tag, but in fact it isn't, right? Let's see, what kind of a defense spending figure at one point we get to, but mind you, I think once again the innovation will also have an impact on this. We can generate effects in different ways also in the future, but an education is needed. That's for sure. All politics is local, and at the end of the day, all members of the parliament in our nations will have, in essence, only three options: either to tax, cannibalize existing budget lines, or to borrow from the future. That's the space that we're headed to.
Christian, thanks, and thanks for your commendable frankness as well as information. So, Paul, you've been very patient. There were some specific questions for you, Paul.
Yeah.
But my question also to you is that what are your takeaways from today's discussion? When we organised or you rather, to be more accurate, with Jure and Mihai and Maria, you organised the next round table. What are the sort of takeaways from today that you think you're going to have to sort of take up in the next iteration of this exercise?
Thanks. Well, first of all, thanks to all three for a tremendous discussion, and I'm glad that you liked so much of the report. And where there was a note of skepticism, it was constructive skepticism, and it was sort of born of long experience of the institutions and how they work. So that comes down to also the question of the EIB. Are we waiting for the EIB? Do we want to do something before the EIB is able to change its statutes? Are we sure the EIB will be able to change its statutes? The SPD has a number of reasons. That's one of them, but also to avoid vetoes, to deal with the fact that the EU also includes countries who are neutral or non-aligned militarily and don't have a military tradition, to deal with countries who may be more sympathetic to Russia and who may use that sympathy to want to block these sorts of things. So it's a coalition of the willing approach, but it's also, you could think of it as a kind of Schengen approach. That's to say, countries that want to get together and cooperate and are a pioneer group, and ultimately it would be ideal if this were to be incorporated at some future date into the EU acquis. But it's safer to start because we need to do it now and we need to do it fast. So it's for the sake of speed that we're doing this. On reserves, Emmanuel, and personnel in general, well, dear Emmanuel, that we made human resources one of our three legs of our table. Really, it is that important. And we took your advice that we don't think that there's a conscription one size fits all, also for capacity reasons, because countries have sold off the barracks and the places where they would put conscripts. And so, yes, there are some countries on the nearer to the eastern flank where this is going to be a solution, but it's not going to be for everybody. But what we do need to do is to make military careers more attractive, to make them also more interchangeable with the private sector, to look at ways also in which people who work in the private sector can do reserve duty and still get their salary paid for those weeks. These sorts of solutions that other societies have, are much more advanced than us in dealing with, countries like Israel, which have a very, very active reserve system, but also countries like Finland, which can suddenly mobilize up to 500,000 people in a nation of about 5 million because they have this reserve system. So there's lots to learn from best practice. But yes, the personnel thing is crucial. It's crucial for cyber security. It's crucial for the defense industries, and it's crucial for staffing the armed forces. And the biggest single untapped or undertapped resource is our women. And that's why we recommend registering all men and women at the age of 18, and having the data on those people and being able to make the best of their skills and offer them opportunities to serve their country in different ways, in uniform, but also in civil society, in civil preparedness, in emergency services. And that gets to the question of countries further away from the front line, where, of course, and you answered really your own question, of course, it may be easier for them to see the emergencies as being fires and floods and droughts, and therefore things where the whole of society does come together. I think of the floods in Valencia, and to have people come together and serve in a sort of civil defense organization that deals with both civil and potentially military emergencies. My final point, these ideas are really meant to kick the anthill. They are meant to shake things up and get the debate going ahead of the white paper. We do hope, we have high hopes for the white paper. Yes, it's politically difficult. I'm going to come to Romain Quignou's point. Yes, we know it's politically difficult, but I don't see people winning elections because they keep their head down and don't talk about the war, don't mention the war. Are they winning elections because of that? There are people who maybe think they're winning elections by saying that NATO is a warmonger and I'm the peace candidate and so on. But that works in some countries and not in others. And I think we have to have that debate, because, the populists are having that debate on their side. They're out there saying this is our leaders are warmongers and we're the people who will bring you peace, and we'll and so what are we going to sit down and they'll spit in our faces and we'll ask if it's raining? So I think we have to have that debate. We have to have it perhaps not in an alarmist way, but we do have to tell people, our political leaders have to tell people the truth. I think there's political opportunity. There are reasons why the white paper is being published on the 19th of March, because there is a little event happening somewhere close to here on the 23rd of February. And until then, it's clear that the question of how do we finance future European defense is being kept somewhat under wraps. But we're going to have to come to it. And I saw Friedrich Merz, who may well be the Chancellor of Germany in a few weeks' time, say yesterday, common bothering, first of all, we need to sort out the procurement system, make it much more rational, much more streamlined and so on. Well, he's right, of course. And common funding, I believe, is one of the ways that we can use as a lever to sort out the procurement system and force our defense planners and our militaries to reconcile and give up the narcissism of small differences. So I'm hopeful, I'm determined, and I think that I hope that this paper has energized the debate and has energized all of you, and I wish you a great weekend. And I can't end without thanking the other people who are not on this podium, but who are part of this team. Juraj Majcin, Mihai Chihaya, and Maria Martisuti, who are all part of this team, who all contributed on civil preparedness, on logistics and military mobility, on all sorts of things in Juraj's case. And thank you. This is a team effort. It's a team product, even if I'm the spokesman on the platform today. Thank you, Jamie.
Well, Paul, you've thanked everybody. So you've done my job for me. Thank you very much indeed. But I also would like to thank our three panelists. It was great that you gave up your time, and also, more importantly, that you really gave us some fantastic sort of feedback and input, which was really useful. To my mind, it's always great to hear that NATO and the EU think that what we're doing is worthwhile and useful, but it's also great to hear that you're already grappling with many of these issues internally, and finally that you're also talking to each other about them as well. So long way to go, but all is not helpless. So you audience, forgive us that we went slightly over time, but nobody left, which is remarkable. So either you don't have jobs anymore, or you don't need to go to offices any longer to do them, or that you believe that it was worth staying for a very rich debate. So watch this space for future defence and security activities. But again, thanks very much for coming today. Paul, thanks for putting it all together and presenting it and concluding so well. And onwards and upwards to the next event. But all for now. Thank you very much indeed.